The panel is called Recommendations for the sectors in Mexico. We were talking about how the study of cases is going on. Now we're going to listen to the experts and how this information can lead us to a good direction. And they will also talk about the methodologies, the solutions, and innovative ways to deal with the future. Now I'm going to introduce Miss Enya Enriquez, who is an expert in hydroecology. She will make a brief presentation of the people with us. She works in, she manages hydrological basins. Now she's doing hydroinformatics thanks to UNESCO from the Netherlands. She has a lot of experience in hydric topics both in Mexico and in the European Union. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass the floor to you, and thanks for your wait. Thank you. It's a true honor to be here, and I'm very excited to know the case studies and to talk more about that topic. In this moment, I was invited to exchange experiences and to keep dialogue in measurements to adapt. The idea of this intervention, let me explain this to you. I'm going to talk to you about the general context that you have been listening today and the participation of the European Union in Mexico, concentrated in the resilience of water. And after this brief introduction to this context, we are going to move to the panel where we are going to receive the members of the panel and the speakers who will talk about the recommendations of adaptation to the hydric system at a subnational level. Then we will wrap up with some answers and also some answers from ourselves. Next slide, please. So in this moment, I wanted to assemble this brief introduction. I wanted the topic to talk about the converging solutions. Nowadays, we are living hydric issues, and I really want to talk about converging solutions. And in this context, this has to do with the different presentations, projects, including a dialogue with the European Union and public workers from Europe and Mexico agreed to work together to ecological transitions and also energetic transitions, where they can deal with different environmental challenges on the environment resources and climate resources. This meeting highlighted the importance of promoting the economical growth and sustainable growth as well. And we discussed priorities and challenges on climate change, biodiversity, and the fight against the change of the uses of soil, deforestation, and other bad practices. Likewise, we also confirm and talk about the Paris Agreement to decrease the increase in temperature and try to avoid the increase of and discuss different strategies. Based on these discussions and based on the dialogues, we have generated different approaches of cooperation and projects. Specifically, we are going to talk about the concentration of water and climate, where we are going to talk about different ways to manage water and adapt to the climate change in Mexico, thanks to the cooperation of the European Union. Considering this context, how is it that we come to this interest in this cooperation and which are the justifications for it? Nowadays, in our country, we have seen and, well, we have informed about the hydric crisis, and we have shown the data by the experts And for example, one important piece of information is that nowadays the dams operate at half their capacity. I am from Jalisco, and we have a prohibition in the agricultural sector due to these restrictions and because of the scarcity and lack of availability of water. Besides this availability of water that we also deal with, and this happens because of the quality of water. We are dealing with the two problems, with quality and quantity. Another situation that we need to consider is extreme droughts in some of the countries of the territory. And very recently, we made an announcement for notice for this 2024 caused by some meteorological conditions and some issues that have increased this situation. And then this is linked to this hydric crisis we have talked about. We also consider that the climate change situation, where and Mexico is adding up as one of the countries that has increased its average temperature in the last years, and there has been an increase in the evaporation of water and then a greater dryness of the floor, which provokes different conditions. Conditions such as forest fires, which has complicated the situation in the territory to conserve and retain water in the Mexican territory. Finally, I will say that the situation of the natural disasters. Last year, we had different hurricanes that provoked great disasters, not only hurricanes, but also floods, which represents vulnerability, economic vulnerability to the life of people and the infrastructure, as well as the degradation of the condition in the ecosystems of the country. This context is important. I want to talk about it and explain why these projects are being performed. Considering these projects and some of the strategies that have been mentioned previously, that I would like to summarize and highlight in these collaborations, we also mention solutions based on nature, where processes and natural processes are used to address natural problems. We also address in these kind of strategies and dialogues the adaptation based on community, where there's an implication of an active participation from the communities identifying the climate risks that they themselves are experiencing. And this is very interesting because in Mexico we have a lot of experience with communities that have a lot of richness and knowledge to help us in this will to learn from the dynamics of the ecosystems where they live. Then we have adaptation based in ecosystems. This has been discussed by other speakers. They concentrated in the conservation of ecosystem, both their biodiversity and ecosystemic and ecosystems. Then the perspective of genre, including that topic to protect the environment and mitigation processes that should be effective for everybody. And climate risk, this is a situation that was uplifted last year, and we consider this year will happen again. Based on all these points, I want to summarize and finish and talk about this context and legal frameworks that have been shared with the European Union. And one of them is the acknowledgement from the European Union about this advance and progress from Mexico to start some commitments, and also the commitment from the European Union to support Mexico in the compliance of these goals and management of water. With this context, now we are going to move to the next dynamic, the participation of the speakers, the members of the panel, and I want to talk about my experience and into study cases where I participated that summarize these situations of crisis of water and climate. As it was mentioned, I study my PhD in the Water Institute in Netherlands. Thanks to UNESCO, my approach is to monitoring the health of rivers and streams using using artificial intelligence, and considering this experience we have had to work experiences very recently last year. We had a multifactorial analysis of the flooding of the stream called El Cangrejo, and in this situation we had a previous fire, then a heavy rain which provoked some problems with the slopes, and this drags some debris that caused the loss of lives and infrastructure. This, along with the Liria hurricane that struck very strongly, and this is a linking experience for understanding the climate risk if there are bad practices in the territory, and the importance of monitoring the rivers and streams, because by monitoring them, and thanks to that, we were able to cover the conditions of the rivers and streams in this region when disasters happen. And we have different factors. We have deforestation, we have the loss of the width of the strain of the flow, and pollutants that increase, or pollutants or garbage that increase the disaster or the severity of the disaster. This leads me to the participation of citizens to create information, and the participation of the citizens to acknowledge these changes in the territory, both in a hydric level and in a climate level. These two, let me talk about them. These are science projects done by the citizens to survey the rivers and streams. Well, and considering this perspective a hydric scarcity and citizen participation, now I want to move on to the panel with recommendations and adaptation to the hydric sector at a national level. In the now, we are going to have the participation from two speakers. The speakers that will be here with us are Antonio Gutiérrez Marcos, who is the ex-director of sewage cleaning and drinking water from CONAGUA, Gonzalo Meredíz Alonso, president of the Council of the Peninsula of Yucatan. Each of you will have 10 minutes to speak about to talk about their contributions and their case studies and your study cases, where we want to highlight your information, the challenges you can identify by basin, methodologies for adaptation and sustainable use of water, legislation and public policies, lessons that you have learned, community participation, and key stakeholders, and if possible, to talk about gender and equity, gender approach and equity. Now, I would like to ask the audience if you have any question about the intervention of each of the speakers, of any of the speakers. You please write them and specify which is the speaker you talk about, and we can compile all this information or all these questions, and then we can share that these questions with the members of the panels. Now I'm going to start with Antonio Gutierrez and his personal background, and then I pass him the floor. Antonio Gutierrez Marcos is a mechanical and electric engineer by UNAM with a specialization in fluids and in fluids. Thanks to his experience, he was in the SVSFE, participating in thermoelectrical projects, and also worked for a National Commission of Water in the direction of drinking water and cleaning of the Valley of Mexico. He was also the president of counselors and of hydraulic counselors, and also president of the unit to improve irrigations in Mexico. savings of vines and body waters, director of CONAGUA in Tabasco, director of operation of DAPAS in Metepec, Jalisco, director of construction of Huapas in Mexico State, and president of the Mexican Association for the Development of Irrigation Units. And he has given different counseling processes, such as suppliers for Pemex and in different projects that are linked to the government. As you can see, he has a great trajectory and a lot of experience. We want to hear more about that. Antonio, the floor is yours. Thank you, and thanks to all the participants. Thanks. Mario Lopez was talking about the Guatemala system. I'm going to talk about that, about the system, but especially about the link in Mexico's valley and what we can do in order not to depend so much from the Guatemala system and make the use of water more efficient. The first slide, please. Can you help me with the presentation? This first slide is related to something mentioned by Mario. Sometimes the abandonment of the infrastructure shows us that we are losing, at least in this case, the Tuxpan Dam, we are losing capacity very dramatically for storing and controlling. These are waters coming from the higher lands from Michoacán. The second picture shows a recovered dam. Let's move on to the next slide. The Cochamala system has 7 dams. Three of them are more important with more storage capacity. We have the Tuxpan Dam with an open channel which sends water to the El Bosque Dam. We also have the Valle de Bravo Dam and Villa Victoria Dam. These are the three important dams, Bosque, Bravo, and Villa Victoria. In total, these three dams has a capacity to store around 780 or 790 millions of cubic meters. The system is old and it originally worked, and this was mentioned by Mario, with a hydroelectrical system. The dams were built in the decades of the 40s and the 50s, all the channels and infrastructure, and they were abandoned. It was up to 1993 where we finished building the last and third stage, which in the end allowed us to send over 15 cubic meters per second to Mexico's valley. Let's remember that Mexico's valley receives, besides from the Guatemala, waters from the Lerma system, which is an underground aquifer. It's a bank of around 160 wells that deliver around 13 cubic meters per second. The basin in the Cuchamala system covers Mexico State, Michoacán, and Mexico City. We have the Tuxpan Dam, which is the first one to regulate. We have a couple of gates through which we send water to the El Bosque Dam, and we prevent expensing the Tuxpan River that later on ends in the Cuchamala River. The Cuchamala River, in the end, ends in the Balsas and goes to Guerrero State. In Mexico State, we have the dance of Ixtapan del Oro, which is a very small one, but it gives around 2 cubic meters. We have the Colorines for regulation purposes, and then pumping to the depotabilizing plant. We have a small one, which is called Chilesto, which recovers leakages from Mexico State. The biggest from the three ones is the one from Valle de Bravo and Villa Victoria 1. Villa Victoria 1 represents, it's very important. It's very important for the system. Why? Because as the El Bosque Dam and Valle Bravo need to pump the water to the El Veros, Villa Victoria is handled by gravity to to the potabilizing plant, meaning that in the operation we basically take advantage when Villa Victoria has good volumes, we use and take advantage of that situation. This is a picture of the Tuxpan channel. We are like 1 kilometer away from the gates of the dam, and I wanted to show you this control structure where water is sent to an irrigation district. Not all the water that is sent to the rest of the dams is used for human consumption. As I told you, we have the District 045. This one consumes a lot of water, a great amount of water, in a very drastic way. We have been working with them for a long time, and the aim is to get investments from the government and work with their support, in which the peasant will give some money and the government will give some more. We need to reduce the volume that is being used in these agricultural zones. The surface of forest has decreased a lot in this zone. The Tuxpan Dam gathers water from the higher lands. They are born in a very nice place. We have two or three small dams, but the two of them are very important. And then we receive water to the Tuxpan Dam. All that zone that used to be a forest or a closed forest has been deforested. We have a deforestation, and these are zones controlled by the organized crime. It's very hard to manage the situation. It's necessary to receive participation from the federal government in order to improve the conditions. And of course, this has also impacted the use of soil for agricultural purposes and cattle purposes. As Enya was saying, one of the biggest problems besides the low levels is that this quality of water gets complicated. With lower volume, then we have greater problems to manage the potabilizing plant. This has been worked with many different collectors, but it's necessary to invest more. It's necessary to improve the cleaning capacity. It's also necessary to improve the capacities of the local communities for them to feel helped. And of course, these dams don't really impact the supply of fresh water to the surrounding communities. There are different settlements that take water irregularly or non-controlled way along the channels. And another point that we have been discussing and working on for years and that we haven't been able to finish is to prevent, especially in those dams, aim to potabilize water and make it for use to prevent that generates problems that it's hard to deal with normal or with average treatment plants. We were not successful, no matter how much we tried to do it with freeze, and we need to consider the current situations in which, like the dam of Valle de Bravo is under 30%. That's a very serious situation. Next one, please. This is a very important topic, the maintenance of the existing systems, because even if the dams are full, the system could stop sending water to Mexico's valley because of lack of maintenance. For years, we finished 15 years ago in the management of the dams in Mexico Valley. Our goal was to improve and renovate the pipelines. This was done, and as Mario said, there are two lines. These are reinforced concrete pipelines, and the pipelines have a number of steel components that allowed us to monitor the sections broken, and this kind of maintenance was suspended. This could stop the supply to a very important zone and a very important number of people. Antonio, you have 1 minute to finish. Okay, so urgent measures to decrease the impacts onto the and drought in Mexico Valley. This is the fourth drought year. We have insisted on an emergency statement from the federal government. We need to improve the management of the basins in Mexico's Valley. We need to reduce the supply of water in the cities. We need to work on the decrease on the leaks. We need to increase the loads and irrigation in the valley. We need to generate infrastructure for the use of rainwater and the modification of guidelines that allow us to potabilize the waters to be used in Mexico valleys. That's all.
Muchísimas gracias. Y muy interesante. Concluimos más adelante. Y ahora
We will
vamos a
conclude
tener una
later. Now we are
participación
going to
de
receive
Gonzalo.
another
Aparte de
speaker,
nuestra pregunta,
Gonzalo.
¿qué
I
preguntas
remind the
nos
audience that if you
tendría de las
have
presentaciones?
any
Por favor,
comment on the
nos pueden
presentation,
hacer
please
llegar.
write them down and we will
Nuestro
share them with the
siguiente
speakers.
panelista es
The next
Gonzalo
speaker
Meredíz.
is on
Él
Gonzalo
ha sido
Meredíz
graduado
Alonso.
de
He
la
is
UNAM con una
biologist from
maestría en
UNAM.
biología
He has a
ambiental
master in environment
desde
biology from
1992. Ha
the
dedicado
University
su
of
carrera
New
a la
York,
conservación
and since
ambiental y uso
1992, he
sustentable de
has
recursos
worked
naturales en
with the
Quintana Roo.
sustainable
Su
use
experiencia
of
incluye
resources
el
in
estudio de la
Quintana Roo.
ecología
His
poblacional,
experience includes
especialmente de especies animales como los cocodrilos.
protection of
Ha colaborado
animals
con
such as
comunidades
crocodiles.
locales
He has
mayas en
worked
proyectos
with
productivos y de
rural
educación
communities,
ambiental. Su contribución se
and his
extiende al
contribution
establecimiento de
extends
varias
to
áreas
the
naturales protegidas y al diseño de
protection
programas de
of
manejo
different areas and
sobre
the
más de
design of
200.000
programs
hectáreas.
encompassing
Actualmente
more than
representa su diploma
200,000
en el
areas,
Parque Cajal
to
de exploración,
like
reservas de
Balanca has
Cozumel y en la laguna
reserves in
Chilchacana.
reservoirs in Cozumel
Actualmente es
and in the
presidente del Consejo de
Lagoon
Cuenca de la
Chichacana.
Península de
He is the
Yucatán.
president
Bienvenido,
of
Gonzalo. Adelante.
the Basin Council in Yucatan.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Muy buenas tardes. Muchas
Hi,
gracias por la invitación.
thanks for
Aquí en la
the
pandemia
invitation.
tenemos amigos ahí en Mérida.
I've
Espero
seen
que sea
many
bueno
friends there. I've
este
seen
video
many
que
friends in Merida. It's a shame that I couldn't be
pero bueno,
there with you, but
la
fortunately,
tecnología nos permite
technology allows us
poder hablar
to be
desde acá.
part of the forum since from Cancun.
No, no puedo proyectar. Si me
I
habilitas
can
para presentación, por favor.
show my presentation. Can you help me with that, please?
Listo. Bueno, y si me pueden confirmar si ven la diapositiva.
Can you see the slides?
Sí, la puedo ver.
Gracias.
Yes, we can see the slides.
Bueno, pues les voy a hablar un poco
Okay,
sobre la
so I'm going to
problemática
talk to you
que
about the Yucatan
luego
Peninsula.
Efraín
Just to
presentó
round up
hace
to
un ratito
what Efrain
desde la
just showed
perspectiva
a moment ago from the
civil
perspective of
y
the
de
civil
la organización
society.
que dirijo como amigo
That's
de Ciancán.
Amigos de Siancan. That's the organization that I
Me voy de lleno al
direct,
tema.
and I'm going to talk about the
Como
topic.
les presentó Efraín,
Just as Efrain was telling
el
you
Consejo
a
de
moment
Cuenca
ago,
de Yucatán
the Basin
realizó un
Council
gran
from
esfuerzo
the Yucatan Peninsula made a very big
a raíz
effort
de la pandemia
in the
para
midst
desarrollar
of the
un plan
pandemic to develop this
de
program
2024 para
from
toda
2020
la
to
península.
2024 for the
Este
whole
trabajo hecho
peninsula.
en
This
coordinación
was done along with the
con la
CONAGUA,
Fundación Río Ronda
with
y la empresa Ítaca
the other,
Environmental con
with
el
Ithaca
consentimiento
Environmental,
del presidente
Rialonte
que así mencionó y
Foundation,
también el apoyo
and the
de
support
Efraín.
from Amigos from
Ya
Cienca.
Efraín nos presentó algunos
Efrain
datos
already showed us some
sobre
details. I'm not
este
going to
panorama
deepen into
de
that.
las acciones,
And I want
pero
to
pues sí es
better
importante este
show the
programa
actions. And of course,
regional
it's true that this
alineado a
regional
los
program is
objetivos
aligned with the
del Programa Nacional Hídrico.
objectives of the National
Es
Hybrid
muy
Program.
importante porque
It's very
se
important
debe aglutinar
because
la visión también nacional respecto
we
al
are
tema.
moving the local
Y pues se
vision
definieron varios objetivos
to
prioritarios
the federal
y
area.
medidas
We have different strategies, 52 specific areas that need to be done in Yucatan Peninsula, and also some different collective actions that need to be performed in the region. I'm not going to go into any further detail, as you can see here, and as Frank said, this can be downloaded from the CONAGUA website. You can see all the hybrid programs from the whole country. So there are different needs. And something very important about this hybrid program, regional hybrid program, is that it ran an analysis of the financial gaps to reach the different goals that around 200,000 people do around this regional planning. These are the goals, strategic goals, and the different collective actions. It's quite important to see the how this basin council was restructured, how to work with the different municipalities, not municipality by municipality, but rather all together to improve the knowledge on the availability of water and about the quality of ecosystems in order to better understand hydrology of the Yucatan Peninsula and, well, many different actions that we are conducting in the whole peninsula in the context of this regional hydric program. And given the complexity, this was shown by Efrain. This is a scheme of the flows. That's a traditional and radial scheme from the center of the peninsula to the coast, but these underground flows are much more complex with many directions. We could say that there are many underground basins, just to say it in some way, that flow in different ways. And we have seen different structures like the Chuchulu crater, the Bacalar, the Tikul, that have a very important influence on the underground flows. So the complexity is high with regards to the flows in the peninsula. These studies have been done with the University of Denmark and Austria, and they are also explaining the regional hydric program. These fractures, we can see these lines in Colbosch in the north of Quintana Roo. We see that the geoelectrical studies done in them show that they are more less waterproof. They facilitate the infiltration of water and to the channels and the aquifers and the flow of water depending on the hydric gradient. And in some places, like in the dark lines, this touches the phreatic mantle. There are wetlands. So these are very important for many reasons that we are going to explain in a second. On the one hand, not taking into consideration the existence of the wetlands in the fractures when designing pathways, that provokes that when there are hurricanes or floods, the flows of water formed in those wetlands that were not considered in the design of the highways with a correct sewage system go away with the water and they end submerged. And since we have more hurricanes due to the climate change, the chances of cities being struck by hurricanes will be isolated from the emergency services and authorities and people in the middle in the middle of the hurricane due to the destruction of the pathways. Actually, in 2005, this happened to us. What happened in Acapulco recently, we also suffered that in Cancun. We were isolated several days because the flows of water in that zone of wetlands took away the pathways. So we didn't have communications for many days. Again, we have worked and we have made a map of the underground rivers from the Yucatan Peninsula. This is Tulum zone in the map. with some aerial and electromagnetic view from a helicopter. We scanned and we saw the underground rivers that match with the shallow rivers, and some other rivers already mapped by divers from the region. So that is the distribution of the rivers in the coast. Sorry, Gonzalo, 2 minutes to finish. So, okay, here if we see that if we don't consider, or if we don't take into consideration the underground rivers in the during the design of pathways or trains, that generates risk to the security of the safety of the people, the infrastructure itself, and investment. And given the context shared by Efrain, we have been creating different tools and manuals for good practices for the construction of pathways in the areas of the wetlands and to prevent disasters provoked by bad planning, to prevent the damage to the rivers and wetlands and underground caves caused by bad planning in the pathways. That's the QR code. In case you want to scan it, you will find this information freely. We also made a manual for adaptation to the climate change and how hotels and houses in the coast can adopt different measures that can allow them to be in the coast without suffering the problems caused by floods or hurricanes, erosion or erosion of beaches. We have made the restoration of wetlands. This is from Siankan. We can see how it was destroyed by a bad pathway. And in order to better adapt to the climate change in the coastline, we are promoting the recovery of these mangroves that little by little are recovering the surface that they used to have. This is a very slow process, but it's a very important way to adapt to the climate change and the salinization risk of the aquifer caused by the increase in level of the sea and the problems caused by the climate change and the increase of seaweed. We can see a lot of seaweed in the picture. We're also working at the national and local levels to get and to have better public policies for the management of residual waters to reduce contamination that, well, already affects the reefs and marine ecosystem affected by the hurricanes and the seaweed. This is a very important regulation which added the karstic soils to define the parameters and the loads in those ecosystems. That is paramount for the peninsula, and we are also working with businessmen and companies to adopt preference schemes and reduce the issues and to help companies to manage residual waters better, both in municipality and the state. Fortunately, Cancun has already started building third-party plants to reduce contamination or to reduce pollution, and we are moving ahead to a culture and a vision on how to manage waters in the context of the climate change and the tourist growth that we are suffering in the region. And of course, we are also working in on training of operators of treatment plants. I'm not give more details. Can we finish, Gonzalo? Well, finally, we are working with rural communities for in the construction of hybrid governance, and since we are dealing with these changes, then we might better adapt both at urban, touristic, and rural worlds to deal with the impact of the climate change. This is a work done by many people and many stakeholders during many years. So thank you so much for this opportunity you have given to me to share this information.
Muchas gracias, Gonzalo. Me imagino que hay
Thank you,
muchos
Gonzalo. I imagine that there are many
importantes
important
que lo
details that
agradecemos.
you
Y
might
pasamos
share.
finalmente
Now we are going to
a Mario
move
Cirett, otro
to
participante
Mario
de
Cirett,
este
another
enlace.
speaker that you already
Adelante, Mario.
know. Please go ahead, Mario.
No problemas. ¿Podrán poner la presentación ustedes, por
Can
favor?
you share the presentation, please? I'm having some issues.
¿Sí? ¿Podrán poner la presentación, por favor?
Can you share the presentation, please? I cannot do it.
Me parece que están en ello.
They are working on that.
No, no puedo ponerla.
Aprovechando el espacio mientras tienen.
Para que ahí está.
Well,
Para que está. No,
it's ready.
¿Sí funciona, Mario? Si no, igual para invitar a las personas aquí.
ya está, ya está.
It's ready. The presentation is there.
Para que pasen por cacahuates y café. Pero te doy la palabra, Mario. Muchísimas gracias.
Okay, Mario, you have the floor now.
Muy bien.
Thank
Como
you.
mencionaba más temprano,
As I mentioned previously, the surface of the Yaqui River is a third part of Sonora State, and it produces two-thirds of the water of the state. That's why this basin is so important, and all the sub-basins as well.
¿cuáles han sido las acciones en campo para
Which are the actions to decrease the impact of the climate change in this important basin?
Muchas son las organizaciones que han
Many organizations have performed different actions to preserve and to increase the vegetation coverage, trying to protect the shallow waters and to decrease the loss of soil caused by the erosion, and at the same time to promote the vegetation along to the vegetation around the basin and diversifying the activities done in that region. What should we do? Well, we need to act right now. For many years, we have been planning to deal with the climate change, but we need to do the things now. We need to perform actions on site, on the field, to decrease the effects and mitigate the effects of the climate change. The region of the basin, the Yaqui Basin, these are some of the stakeholders that have preserved the site or restored the site to decrease the loss of soil. The soil is the base of the system. Without soil, we don't have systems. Without the system, we don't have water. CONAM has been doing this kind of actions for many years in all the region. There are 15 municipalities where they have worked, especially the high basin of the Yaqui River and the sub-basin of Baviste and part of Naus. Another organization, non-governmental organization, Los Ojos Basin AC, has worked for 25 years. Violet Clark, the founder, have done above 1 million cubic meters to keep the soils. We have a very clear example, one ranch in this next to this basin that has been able to decrease erosion and has been able to restore vegetation to such a level that we can perceive a vegetation after all this year. CONAFOR has also worked in the area and done payments for environmental services. This is difficult for the members of the land, owners of the land. Some have been able to perform some actions. The Skyan Alliance, which is a North American association, has been working in the area, starting with monitoring, and now they are focusing their attention to do things on site. This is an ally in the region, Jaguar del Norte Association. It's an area to preserve some thousands of hectares. They have performed conservation and protection of the species. And this is more specific for Los Aros. They have been working on different conservation actions. Profauna has worked in Sonora for 6 years, and they have doing some restoration on site in the San Pedro Basin and also in the higher lands of the Yaqui River in the borderline with the Moctezuma River. Jaguar Watershed Management Group, they have worked for 4 years in the area, especially with solutions based on nature. Wildlands Network has been working for the region too, in the area of Agua Prieta, Cananea. Some of the action fields done and that we have also identified for this region, some of them are about some cubic meters and some other thousands of cubic meters in thousands of areas that have been done. You have performed other actions, especially by CONAM, by CONAFOR too, but also by organizations that preserve and of conservation. I see civil associations that have prevented filtration. The river areas, on river, some work has been done around the river, and some of you have seen that the pound of grass is worth more than a pound of meat for action restoration purposes. Greenhouses to gather hermoplasma. This has been done by CONAFORE and other institutions in that region. Also established a bee panels. CONAM has at least done for this has done this for at least 15 years, and they have promoted these different actions in the region, in the center of the basin, and in the central north part of the basin with very good results. They have gathered water in public and private spaces, diversification of production. These are some of the examples, but some other activities, such in zones with a lot of accumulation of fuel, they have been asked to control the log in order to decrease the chances of fires. There have been fires, controlled fires in the region, and this has allowed us to decrease the effects of no-see fire on some ecosystem, including some grasslands and some forests of trees with firewalls. And also, thanks to training, this has been a core element to reach different agreements. Sorry, Mario, you have 2 minutes left. We cannot tell the producer that they shouldn't do something if they are not convinced to do it. These are some of the tools. We use the CONAFOR manual as well as the method of ecological limits in hydrological alteration zones. This has been very useful and it has worked. Basically, we have been able to gather water in cities and communities, but we are still missing to inject water to the soil to promote the growth of aquifers and lead and deal with floods. That's what we have seen in the system. If you have any questions, you just let me know.
Muchísimas gracias, Mario,
Thank you,
por
Mario,
estas
for the for those
¿Hay
experiences.
público presente?
For the participants in
¿Alguna
the room,
pregunta o
do you
comentario que
have
quisieran
any
externar?
question or comment that you want to share?
No veo movimiento en
I
la
don't
mano, entonces
see
paso,
anybody
paso a
wanting to
preguntar
participate. Now I'm
la
going to move on
que
to on
teníamos
one
agendada,
question that
se
we
eliminó,
had over here, but it seems to me
pero
that this question was deleted.
déjenme encontrarla.
Let me find it.
Esta, sí, adelante, veo a alguien que
Go
levantó la mano.
ahead. Someone raised his hand.
Adelante.
Go ahead, please.
¿Te pasó? I
I think that one of the issues in Yucatan is the calculation of availability of water for human consumption. It is true that the review is at peninsula level when we made the balances for planning and hydrological area. There's a lot of differences in the environment and, of course, in the distribution of precipitation. There are places where there's no more availability of water, like in the north of Quintana Roo or the south of Yucatan, and they are consuming the natural discharges, and this can affect the biodiversity, especially in the coastlines. So the idea of using the eight collective action has to do with the review of the situation in specific, and to restore the Basin Council to deal with the problem of water availability.
Le agradezco su
I'm
intervención.
very thankful for your
Para
participation. Now,
continuar,
in order to
no
continue,
sé si gustaras agregar
I don't
algo,
know if
Gonzalo, en
you
cuestión de
want to
la
add
calculación
something,
de availability de
Gustavo,
agua y Cancún. Ujú.
Sí, me
about
da
the
gusto
basin
observarlo,
in Cancun.
ese
Well, I
punto.
am glad that Eduardo talks about this point, because we think that in the peninsula there's a lot of water. Of course, there's a lot of water. However, the high demand, the high current and future demand, and the climate change jeopardize the water. There's discrepancy about the versions of availability in Merida and Cancun. There are risks in this sense. So this is a topic that we need to keep in mind, and to just say that there's a lot of water. We know that in the future there might be impacts on the aquifers.
Muchas gracias, Gonzalo, por
Thank you
la
so much, Gonzalo, for that
Hay
feedback.
una pregunta de
There's one
los
question
participantes
from the
virtuales.
participants, from the virtual
Quisiera pedirles que
participants.
levantaran la mano
You could raise
cuál
your
es su
hands,
duda
or
para poder
and you can
mejorar la planeación
answer that
y
question.
eficiencia
How to
y
improve
rentabilidad de los proyectos
the
hídricos por protección y conservación
feasibility
en
of projects
contextos
for
de
conservation
corrupción,
in and
expansión
surroundings, or in an
y
environment where
logro de los
corruption
objetivos
makes it
sustentables de
hard to
México.
achieve
Gracias
sustainable
a Botillo en
results,
Jalisco,
like in
esta región
Jalisco, the plant of Atotonilco, in Hidalgo, the
Zumpango,
dehydration of the
se puede
Zumpango
avanzar por
lake,
infraestructura, etcétera. Bajo
things
su
about
experiencia
infrastructure.
para
And considering your experience,
luego
this
la cuestión de
question
seguridad y la
encompasses
apertura a
matters
otros
such as
proyectos
safety and
bajo
opening
este
to
gobierno.
conduct
¿Quién
projects
me
despite
puede
this
contestar
safety
primero?
or lack of safety.
Gustará
Which of you would
responder
like
para
to
luego
answer this question based on their experience?
Gonzalo, adelante.
On your Gonzalo, go ahead.
Pues sí, definitivamente
Well,
ese impacto que
definitely,
mencionas
this is the corruption is a problem that complicates the development of work. And likewise, corruption is not only a governmental issue. It has to do with the citizens that accepted and promoted. Our work is to change the mindset and the perception we have about ourselves. We need to start respect ourselves a little bit more, and we need to start to understand how every time that we accept bribes or we allow these kind of actions happen, we are of course contributing to the destruction or of these projects that we do. So it's indispensable as society to reflect upon how each of us contribute to corruption both at governmental and population or civic levels. Many years should pass before we can get this good level of development. Mario, go ahead. I think that we need to pressure our governments. We need to not only shout, but propose which are the measurements or the actions that we need to implement. We need to promote public actions that are written and expressed as law and to promote the compliance of those rules. Corruption, and I agree with Gonzalo, that's something that we are not going to end from one day to the other, but by applying pressure
Muchas
every
gracias,
day.
Mario. Y por último,
Thank you, Mario.
quisiera
And finally, I would like
darle la
to
palabra a Antonio y
pass
que
the
nos
floor
pudiera
to
presentar
Antonio,
brevemente
and
la
if you can
diferencia
highlight
entre
something that
régimen
was
actual y
interesting
régimen actual.
in your presentation, like that, which
Poco
is Act
respondiendo a la
Now.
pregunta,
Well, I
principalmente
want to answer the
Mario y
question,
Gonzalo,
and I agree with Mario and Gonzalo, and I want to say that
los
planning
proyectos
is
de desarrollo
one
en ese
of the
sistema,
points
la
discussed.
institución
Planning was
CONAGUA
done in the
existía
institutions,
y la
CONAGUA,
planeación
and the
que existe
subdirection of planning that doesn't
posteriormente
exist
se
anymore.
requiere de ahí toda la derivación para que
They made the projects, they studied the cost and benefits, they opened the portfolios in Hacienda and so on. Lately, the Potrillo Dam was changed because of a presidential decision, and it was not designed to supply water to León and Bini Jalisco. So the Atotonilco plant is the biggest one in Latin America, but operates half its capacity. Sumpangol Lake, from many decades ago, it changed its main purpose and it was used as regulation lake with lower flights or with fewer flights, and considering the IFA airport, it was desiccated. We need to act now. We are on time. If we work together as society and institutions, we can change habits, we can improve the management of the spacings, and that will help us to guarantee somehow the survival of cities. We think of the Cochamala system and we are like, okay, it contributes 30% of the water. We have 70% from a bucket that we don't know how much water it has. We see many straws, but we don't know how much water is there. And something interesting about Mexico City is that there were feasibilities for the urban development, thinking that the Cochamala system would always have enough water. But the climate change is a reality. In fact, it's a reality. The loading zones are invaded in the Mexico Valley, Tlalpan, Coajimalpa, Magdalena Contreras, everything is invaded. So that's why we need to improve the management. You need to retrieve water precipitation. The reuse of water is paramount. That's our way out. We have a lot of rainwater and precipitation that is over the Cochamala. We want rain, and we are angry with the rain. Every time that happens, we are angry. But this was done. This has been done for many years. the this is something that we need to change, and it's of the utmost importance to work along.
Te agradezco, Antonio, por este cierre. Y por
Thank you
último,
for
tenemos
that
una pregunta
closing. And
de
finally, we have
Gonzalo.
a question from Fabiola in the room. Yes, I would like to ask you to share a little bit more on how these projects or these pilot projects are being pushed forward through the council, through the Basin Council, because truth is that since the last 6-year term from the previous president, there has been some kind of a stagnation. And the specific case of the Yucatan Peninsula would be a case of a few of those cases, along with Rio Bravo, that are in operation. I would like to know how is it that this is being articulated and how you are moving the resources to operate this council, this basin council. Go ahead, Gonzalo. That's a pretty good question. Sometimes we can explain ourselves how, but in the last presidential term, there were no funds for the basin councils, and that has happened for many years. For so many years, for some years, we haven't had any budget. And something important I would like to say about the Yucatan Peninsula is that there's governance and there's a commitment from the stakeholder. There's a lot of work being done, both at official and community and organization levels. And the Basin Council has been a very important space to analyze and discuss. I think that this makes the Basin Council live. We have a very important commitment. Even though we don't have resources, we are supported by to doing the work that needs to be done by the managers. There's a team vision, and the programs, National Hydric Program is a sample of it. So even though we don't have the resources, there's a lot of goodwill in the zone, and the budgets are not good. There's not so much investment as we wished. However, there is investment. There are projects for conducted. There are covenants along with the education secretary to promote the environmental education. Secretaries and investing resources. The organizations are also gathering resources to make some of the structures that I showed you. And what I would like to do is to close with something positive, even though the problems are big and the conditions in the peninsula are every time more complicated. We have made some progress. We have a third level improvement in the zones like in Cancun. I think that there are important and positive things being done, and I would like to keep this in mind. There are challenges in the consumption of water. We are doing our best. This online work helps us to save resources, and there are some positive actions to improve and to the structures and in the region. We are far from a final solution, but we are moving forward despite the lack of budget and or funds. I think you are moving in the right way. Thank you, Gonzalo. Thank you so much to you all, both digital attendants and on live attendance. There are challenges and there are lessons. There's something is being done, but we need to keep on working right now by identifying these realities, such as good practices and adaptation to this climate change. We are really thankful, and now we invite you to stay to the work tables online. Thank you so much.